This past weekend was a great one for me as the former Battle of the Bay between the San Francisco 49ers and the Las Vegas Raiders went the Niners' way. Brock Purdy versus Jarrett Stidham, not exactly the matchup that we predicted at the start of the season, but nonetheless was a very good one. 37-34 went to overtime, both quarterbacks battling it out. And surprisingly, because you talk about the number one defense in the league going against Jarrett Stidham, and we can laugh at the expense of Jarrett Stidham, but he looked like advertised. He looked like the guy that when people were talking about Brady, successor, he looked like that guy. If that holds up, congratulations to Josh McDaniels and the Raiders. We'll see. We need more sample size. But a lot of the story is based on the Raiders benching their quarterback of 9+ years, Derek Carr. Fresno State, always wanted to be a Raider, wanted to retire Raider, says, I don't want to leave the Raiders. But the Raiders left him, are leaving him behind the dust. So now we look to the future. We have a week of seeing Jarrett Stidham out there. Again, still got to see more. But how are you feeling about the Raiders quarterback situation and how they look going into the future, Kyle?
Well, I don't think that the Raiders can solve this problem by just getting rid of Derek Carr and doing nothing. Basically, the way that I look at it is that there's four scenarios for the Raiders at this point. One, they end up keeping Derek Carr at the end of all of this, and he becomes their Phillip Rivers from 2013 to 2019 on the Chargers, basically.
So the most unlikely. Got it.
Yeah, maybe they choose that route, but I mean, Derek Carr's made it this. Derek Carr survived like 3 different coaching regimes when we all thought the first move was going to be to move off of Derek Carr. So
yes, but there's been some reports coming out of this recent week that people in the Raiders building, Mark Davis included, might not have been the most kind behind the scenes when talking about Derek Carr. So it doesn't sound like they want to make this. It sounds like the ownership may have forced McDaniel's hand, but carry on.
Well, so this brings us to the other scenario. So the one is Derek Carr comes back. The next scenario is they move on from Derek Carr and they get a better quarterback immediately. Now, I don't see that possibility looking at the landscape of the league. I don't think that Aaron Rodgers is going to fall out of the sky and land in Las Vegas. I don't think they're going to get Lamar Jackson. I don't really see the path forward for like, we're going to get an immediate upgrade versus Derek Carr. It could happen, but I don't see it. The next option is they get rid of Derek Carr and do nothing, which good luck with that. I mean, Jarrett Stidham played better this last week than any Derek Carr game of the last 7 weeks. So I guess you could point to that and say that there's optimism there. But,
yeah,
McDaniel
justified his decision to bench Derek Carr with how Jarrett Stidham played.
Yes, if you believe that it was truly based on merit and not based on them protecting the value of Derek Carr going into the offseason, then yes.
Yeah, if we can extrapolate that Stidham performance and compare that against Derek Carr's stat lines throughout the year, you would say 1 week sample size, McDaniels has to feel pretty damn good about making the decision. It's not a guarantee you're going to get this from Stidham, but he does know how to operate the offense more than Derek Carr ever felt comfortable operating the offense throughout the year.
And so what you just described there brings us to the last option, which is move on from Derek Carr and draft a quarterback, which, if the Raiders draft a quarterback, I am sure it's not going to be one of the good ones because the Las Vegas Raiders are currently about a 7-win team on paper. They were a 7-win team on paper last year. This year, they're a 7-win team that added Davante Adams, which maybe you could argue should improve their win total somewhat, but then you subtract Hunter Renfrow, who's missed over 70% of the season. You subtract Darren Waller, whose production has fallen off a cliff when he's been healthy this year. So, altogether, has kind of ended up as a net zero. And lo and behold, if the Raiders win this last game against Kansas City, which they probably won't, but even if they do, they'll finish with a whopping 6-11 record. In 5 of those games, they blew 14-point leads. So the Raiders are in an interesting place where I don't see any of those options really fixing their problem. I think Derek Carr is a symptom of other bad decisions that the Raiders have made over the past 5 years. And now the consequences are all coming together and they have to, quote unquote, pay the bill for their past mistakes.
Now, I'm going to go back to option 2 because you mentioned get a better quarterback. You mentioned Aaron Rodgers. You mentioned Lamar Jackson. But there's one big omission. Former 6th-round quarterback, played under McDaniel for years,
Jimmy
Tom
Garoppolo.
Brady. Well, that too, kind of. But here today, is Tom Brady a better quarterback than you're sticking with that motherfucker, Derek Carr?
Yes, but not by much. And again, we know Tom Brady kind of needs an offensive line. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes, better than Derek Carr. Not enough to make the Raiders a contender, but in a vacuum, better than Derek Carr.
I see what Brady does well. And you mentioned the lack of offensive line. When we know Brady has been able to make offensive lines better. Now, we look at Tampa this year, and they have had an atrocious amount of injuries to that offensive line. So I'm giving him a little bit of a pass this year. We go to this past week, though. You can tell the ability's still there. 3 touchdowns, big bombs to Mike Evans. The guy can still sling it. So I do believe that he is better than Derek Carr in a pure vacuum and in every other facet of his life. I think that Tom Brady is better than Derek Carr. I not to be rude to Derek Carr, but it just is what it is. Now, if you told me you put
you
Tom
said
Brady,
every facet of his life, that's kind of rude.
I mean, in the bank account,
Derek Carr,
I would say
Derek Carr seems like a good husband.
The wedding, yeah, that is true, but we'll see. Give it time, never know. Anyway, Tom Brady, if you put him on the Raiders offense, let's say, like I said, he incrementally makes the offensive line of the Raiders better. You still have Devontae there. You have Hunter Renfrow. You have Darren Waller. Darren Waller may have took a step back. Could have been an injury. Could have been a lack of motivation. Either way, you get him back. Maybe the Gronk option's still on the table. We've heard rumors about that in the last week. Maybe he's just not feeling the situation in Tampa either. Who knows? That's neither here nor there. But I feel like that those are all pieces that a Brady-led team can really work with and make work. Josh Jacobs, we'll see how that offseason situation kind of like works out as well. I think Tom Brady would make the Raiders better. Now, that's just the offensive side of things. We'll go to the defense. And again, having to watch every snap, every play of the Niners game, the Niners were just carving up this Raiders defense. And Max Crosby is working his ass off each and every week. Chandler Jones, I believe, went on season-ending IR. He hasn't obviously had the season that many expected him to have. Signed a multi-year deal in the offseason. We'll see if he can come back next season and fix whatever happened or look healthier or whatever they have to do, limited snap count to make Chandler Jones work, because Chandler Jones has worked for years. So it's kind of amazing that he's taken a step back here. If they can address that defense, add Tom Brady, they will be a better team next year. But then again, that's all going to come down to McDaniels too, because I still have my question marks. I still have my thought that Josh McDaniels may not be the coach that he's been advertised, a little bit of a fraud. And I look at the fact that Rich Vespacchia was able to make this team a playoff team, given a number of ridiculous circumstances that no NFL team should ever have to go through in a given year, whether that be your former first-round wide receiver killing someone or your head coach to start the year being involved in one of the largest scandals in recent memory in the NFL. That team was able to be a playoff team. This team, with Devontae Adams added and Chandler Jones added, took a huge step back. So we'll see. The Raiders, they're a hard team to predict. We mentioned something actually interesting to kind of also relate into this subject in the Slump Buster group chat. We mentioned the amount of quarterback depth in the AFC. The Raiders do have to make a big splash just to even get in that conversation. You look in their own division, you have Patrick Mahomes, you have Justin Herbert. Currently, Lamar Jackson's out there. Kenny Pickett's looking good. Deshaun Watson exists. You look in the AFC South, you have Trevor Lawrence.
You said Kenny Pickett before Joe Burrow. I was going to say.
Hey, I'm circling around. Joe Burrow, Josh Allen. It's just so loaded at the quarterback position. Even still, that it's a former first-round pick who has looked bad the last few weeks, okay, but still has shown flashes of being a competent quarterback. In fact, if it's a shame that the playoffs is in like 10 teams, because you can make a case for a number of teams in the AFC to make it. And the Raiders are falling behind in that. If they do move on from Derek Carr, if they don't get Tom Brady, then again, you mentioned the draft option. They have to really swing and hit a home run. They have to find, I don't know, their Brock Purdy, their Kirk Cousins, their Dak Prescott. whatever it is, they have to hit on something later in the draft, because I'm looking around the landscape of this coming draft. CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, those guys are going early. Okay. Maybe you trade some assets. Maybe you get into that conversation of trading up to grab one of those guys. Okay. Maybe that's the thing we could talk about. Will Levis, I know you're a fan of Will Levis, or at least friends of the show, have mentioned Will Levis's name in the past. Will he be the quarterback that a McDaniels led team it sees as their future star? Because I feel like since making this move to Las Vegas, Mark Davis really wants to make a splash. And I feel like the only thing that can do that for him at this point is Brady. And if they miss on Brady, this entire McDaniels regime is just going to crumble immediately.
Well, so splash, I think, is interesting because is it a splash in terms of drawing eyeballs, or is it a splash in terms of winning games?
Well, you do both. If you win games, you'll draw eyeballs. And I think when they made the moves that they were making in this offseason, they thought they were going to win games. They thought they were going to win more games than last year. And they should have won more games than last year. You look at some of the early season games in which they were blowing, and the obviously first time in NFL history, the team's blown, 4, 5, 10 plus point leads.
They blew 5 14-point leads, but I think they still went like 2 and 3 in those games that they blew 14-point leads. But they did blow 5.
They blew the Cardinals game. They lost that game. They blew the Jaguars game. They lost that game.
Yeah.
They lost the game to the Niners just this past weekend. But
was that a 14-point lead? I guess it was. So that would be 6 then, because the Patriots game was a 14-point lead.
Digits. I think it was just a 10-point lead, but I think the official stat is double digits. Besides that, too, you also factor in the embarrassing losses. And you mentioned the Patriots. The Patriots gave them a gift. You lost to Baker Mayfield when he was in LA for 2 days. You lost to Jeff Saturday this year.
They got shut out by the Saints. They got shut out
by the Saints the previous week. I mean, the Saints also kind of embarrassed the Eagles this past week, but still, that's not a good loss. This Jeff Saturday loss is not a good loss, especially with what happened to Jeff Saturday every game since that Raiders game. You go back, literally the next week, they allowed like 50 points to the Cowboys in the fourth quarter.
So this is interesting because you brought up the point about like they expected to win more games than they did last year. I think that was an unreasonable expectation from them because I think it ignored some fatal they didn't evaluate themselves correctly. One, they went 7-1 in games that were 1-possession games last year. And secondarily, think about how much bullshit had to go right for them to get into the playoffs last year, whether it was the prisoner's dilemma with the Chargers or the Colts blowing that game against the Jaguars or the Colts blowing the game against the Raiders the week before that. Like, so much had to go right, combined with the fact that they knew their defense had problems.
So much had to go right, but so much went wrong too. So I feel like that counteracted that in a way.
Well, yeah. And then you get to this year and they added Chandler Jones, and Chandler Jones has been a big disappointment. And other than that, like they they weren't a good defense last year and they still subtracted Casey Hayward. Jonathan Abram got cut in the middle of the season. That was a former first-round pick. Yannick Ngakoue getting traded for Rock Ya-Sin. Like, they had fatal flaws on that defense. And then this year in yards per game, they're currently ranked 26th in DVOA, which is the stat I like throwing out. They're 31 out of 32 in the league. Like, these are fundamental flaws with the defense that you resolve by like drafting for 2 to 3 years. And no Max Crosby, he's a very good player. Max Crosby's not going to solve those problems for them because of his singular presence. Like, there's just so many fundamental flaws on the Raiders defense and in part on the Raiders offensive line. I mean, Colton Miller's the best player on that team, and I saw Nick Bosa push him into the quarterback for a game-sealing interception.
Listen, Bosa's going to win a lot of matchups. I'll give Colton Miller because he neutralized Bosa a majority of that game. It just, when the game gets late, eventually the best player on the field is going to take over, and that's Nick Bosa this year.
I've never seen that before. He physically pushed Stidham into an interception. He pushed the offensive lineman into Stidham for the game-sealing interception.
Nick Bosa is a grown-ass man, and there is no question in my mind that he is this year's Defensive Player of the Year. But back to the Raiders, I think that the Raiders, they looked at their roster. You mentioned they neglected some obvious flaws. This defense, yeah, it had some holes that needed to be addressed. And trading Ngakoue, you thought you were getting a better player in Jones. I think over the course of their career, that would hold true, that Chandler Jones has been a better player than Yannick Ngakoue. Yeah. Didn't pan out this year. Chandler Jones, maybe he's aged out. Maybe he's just washed. Yannick Ngakoue still having, I think he's with the Ravens this year, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, he got traded to the Colts. I don't know if
Traded-
he's still there ann't
I think something happened. I remember seeing him in a different uniform, but
But yeah.
besides the Colts. But regardless, did you mention like trying to fix holes in your secondary? You get like Rock Ya-Sin, you try it.
And they lost Casey Hayward and lost Jonathan
Casey
Abram.
Hayward. You also make some changes in the coaching staff too. Was it Gus Bradley that was there last year?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gus Bradley was there last year, and veteran defensive coordinator has had a lot of successful defenses in the league. He was holding together well, I felt, at points.
And they brought in Patrick Graham, who is the defensive coordinator with Joe Judge's Giants, which, they saw some improvement, but obviously
Patriots guy,
but the defense was flawed from the start this year, and they weren't.
The guys would have also leveled up. There's always that hope too that you drafted some of these guys. McDaniels, they did a complete teardown of like the roster to get rid of all these Mayock guys, get rid of these Gruden guys, bring in their own guys. And it appears that the guys they brought in just weren't good enough. They made some poor mistakes in their evaluation process, which again pushes the pendulum of focus to Josh McDaniels. Can he properly evaluate talent for this Raiders roster moving forward? Because you bring in a guy like McDaniels, and even though Ziegler obviously is the GM, McDaniels is making the final roster decisions. I think that it's one of those situations. And this is a guy that also traded up to draft Tim Tebow as his quarterback. That is on McDaniels' ledger. That is something that needs to be stated when talking about, can he evaluate the quarterback position? Can he evaluate any position? His mentor, Bill Belichick? Yes, we acknowledge that Bill Belichick is arguably the greatest of all time coach. I know that you have some back and forth for Andy, but still, Bill Belichick, his resume speaks for itself.
Semantics. Yeah.
But as a talent evaluator, Bill's been having a rocky last decade and a half.
Well, mixed bag. Yeah. Mixed bag.
Does that trickle down to the guys that depart from the Bill Belichick empire?
So I think it's a combination of both. And this leads, we talked about kind of what the past is, and I kind of am thinking about the future of the Raiders now. Cause like of the 4 options that we listed for Carr specifically, which is one decision to make, I don't know if any of those like necessarily put them in a better direction. Cause like, say they take that $40 million and they give it to Brady and they give it to Gronk and they sign another player, and then that's their $40 million, and that's how they spend it. And then they take their number 11 pick in the draft or whatever they get, and they draft a defensive player who brings an immediate impact to the team. Like say it's a great player who brings an immediate impact in the linebacking group or whatever. Like even if they do that, like it doesn't solve the fundamental problem of like, you had all these picks for all these years and you took Cleveland Ferrell over Josh Allen. Josh Allen, the linebacker, not Josh Allen, the quarterback. You took Cleveland Ferrell over Josh Allen. You took Jonathan Abram with the pick that you got for Amari Cooper. That turned into nothing. He's no longer on the team. You took Henry Ruggs. You took Damon Arnett. You took Trayvon Mullen. You drafted Lynn Bowden in the 3rd round. He never even played a single game for your team. Like these are fundamental Alex Leatherwood. I forgot about him too. That was a terrible pick also. Like all of these picks failing over and over and over again. At a certain point, you can't keep whiffing like that and not deal with the ramifications of that. So even if Brady comes in and makes an improvement over Carr, even if they bring in Gronk, and even if they draft an immediate impact defensive player or even an immediate impact quarterback, like say Will Levis comes in and wins Rookie of the Year, or they pick Anthony Richardson and he puts up 25 touchdowns his first year. Like even if they do that, it doesn't make them better than fighting for the 7 seed with the Patriots. Like none of those things are going to get them over the hump to a level of competitive. So my idea in a vacuum, it's not a full scale teardown, but it's like the things that went right for you: Renfro in the 5th round, Waller being signed as an undrafted guy, like even Max Crosby being picked in the 3rd round. At least contemplate striking while the iron is hot on those guys. I don't know exactly what their value looks like, but at least look around and see what you can get. Cause like those are great value pieces. And I think maximizing that value while you have a chance on guys like that might be a way to help you going forward.
Here's my problem actually though with that. Again, I have my questions about can Josh McDaniels evaluate talent? If he can't, if Ziegler and him can't, then you're trading those guys for the unknown draft picks. And if those guys are less talented than a Max Crosby, a Hunter Renfrow, or a Darren Waller, then I know I'm not going to be good. That's the second half of that equation. You have to also make sure that you can hit on those draft picks that you're getting in return. I know that Max Crosby is good. I know that Hunter Renfrow is good. I know that Darren Waller is good. I kind of want to keep those stars in my building, or keep guys in my building that I know can help me win games, because I think is a poor idea for a team to invest in blowing it all up unless they are competent enough to draft well and maneuver the draft well. And obviously there's a lot of unknown. No one's going to be perfect when it comes to the draft, but I just haven't seen the track record there. It's a limited track record, granted, but I haven't seen what I would like to see from McDaniels or other Bill Belichick proteges to ensure that I think that would be the most viable strategy for them.
So I don't even think this is a blowing it all up strategy. It's just acknowledging that, like, do you want to pay Hunter Renfrow $17 million a year? Darren Waller I know Darren Waller has kind of just burst on the scene. He's 30 years old and has 400 receiving yards this year. Like, these are potentially value plays to where these guys are exiting when they're valuable to your team. And so it might be ideal to maximize while the iron's hot.
I was to do the short-term signing of a Tom Brady, I want those guys in my building. I don't want those guys not in my building. So yes, it would be a mistake for the Raiders to think short-sighted versus the long-term view. Hard to say, because you look at a situation like the Rams, the Rams would not trade a thing in the world to get those draft picks back that it resulted in their Super Bowl championship. I think if the Raiders, I know it seems like a long shot now, but if the Raiders were to put themselves into contention, you get Brady, maybe you make one or two incremental moves. The offense just functions at a better pace because you have a guy that literally knows that offense like the back of his hand. Who knows? Things happen. Weird things happen. There's a lot of weird things that have happened in the NFL. I mean, the Bengals making it to the last year's Super Bowl, we're still marveled at going into this offseason. There's some stories this year. TCU was in the national championship game.
But if you're running,
sometimes shit happens.
If you're running an NFL organization, your strategy shouldn't be shit happens. Maybe shit will happen to us. That's not a good strategy for running an NFL organization.
If you just keep throwing darts at a wall, eventually you'll hit a bullseye. At least that's my strategy. Just rear back and throw as hard as you can. But
that strategy is working great for the Raiders. They haven't won a playoff game in 20 years.
Anyway, guys, if you think that the Raiders could turn things around in their 21st, 22nd, or 23rd year, we'd like to hear your thoughts. What should be the future of the Raiders at the quarterback position? How do you like their prospects at getting one of these elite free agents, draft picks, whatever it may be? Drop that in the comment section as well. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our social medias. This nice little neon light display kind of has our handle there, at Slumpbuster Podcast, at Slumpbuster Pod. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy, and we'll see you next time.